Are you still working 40 hours a week? You realize that's over 30 hours. That's almost 50 hours a week, just knocking on the door to 60 hours. Well, if you'd like to reduce your working hours by upwards of 90%, I've got the book for you. The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferris. I got the ebook. This is an e-reader. I don't have the actual book, but it is on here. I think. Maybe I deleted it. This book was on my radar for a while. I've seen this book recommended in a lot of lists of productivity or entrepreneurship type books, always with a nod to how it was a game changer or really changed somebody's perspective. A few books ago, I felt like reading some nonfiction, so I thought, what the hell? And I was moderately disappointed. And I'm going to tell you why. Wouldn't be much of a review if I didn't do that. But first, here's a quick summary of the book. 4-Hour Workweek describes how to enter an elite class of people the author has dubbed the New Rich. These people have cast off the shackles of the usual 9-to-5 lifestyle and the soul-sucking cloud of the office cubicle, and instead generate all the income they need to support their lifestyle through a streamlined, automated business venture. They usually only work a few hours a week. I'm not exactly sure how many hours, that's not really explicitly said. Since all of their income is generated in only a few hours of work every week, they are free to spend the rest of the time doing whatever it is you want to do. Travel, I guess. Joining the ranks of the New Rich is achieved through a 4-step process. I won't go into too much detail here, but it basically boils down to 1. Define. Figure out what it is you want and what things are holding you back. Think about the kinds of things you'd like to do if you weren't encumbered by having to work 40 hours a week. Step 2. Eliminate. Get rid of all the stuff that is sucking the time out of your day. Things like emails, meetings, waiting at red lights, that sort of thing. Number 3, automate all the remaining stuff. Farm out any tasks you haven't been able to eliminate using things like a virtual assistant or a well-trained pet, I guess. And number 4, liberate. Free yourself from the confines of a 9-to-5 work schedule by negotiating a remote work agreement with your boss. At this point, since you've eliminated most of the tasks that took up most of your time and automated the rest of the tasks that took up most of your time, you can now do your job in only a few hours a week. And since you're working remotely, your boss won't be able to tell. In all the time when you're supposed to be working, the author walks you through how to set up a drop shipping business to sell stuff online. This will allow you to generate all the necessary income to sustain your lifestyle while only putting in a few hours a week. That's basically it. That's the whole book. The book goes into excruciating detail on how to achieve these things. There's a whole bunch of web resources listed as well, and that's pretty much it. I mentioned that I was mostly disappointed by the book. I don't feel like it lived up to all the hype that it got, or at least that I thought it had. And there's a few reasons for that. First, a lot of the advice given here is a little dodgy. I won't go as far as to say any of the advice given is mean-spirited or cruel, but you might not come across as a completely decent human being if you follow all of it. During the elimination part of the 4 steps, the author instructs you to do things like ask people questions through emails so that they'll do research for you. He tells you to always tell your colleagues that you're super busy so that they'll leave you alone even when you aren't actually super busy. He talks about learning to be difficult when it matters, which I think is genuinely good advice, but it's something that should be used sparingly. In the starting a business section, the author talks about how you can join some different professional organizations and attend seminars to make it look like you have expertise when you really don't. While none of these tactics are illegal, there's a good chance they might not sit well with you. A lot of them didn't sit well with me. This is perhaps most prominently on display in the section of the book that talks about negotiating a remote work agreement. If you remember, the whole reason that you're trying to negotiate a remote work agreement is that you've whittled your job down to something that you can do in a few hours a week, and you want to work remotely so that your boss doesn't realize this. The steps the author lays out to negotiate this agreement might best be described as deceptive. He tells you, for instance, to take a fake sick day and then do some work at home, trying extra hard to be extra productive during that time. Then upon your return to the office, you're supposed to casually mention to your boss that you felt like doing some work when you were at home and were remarkably productive. You know, on that day where you were supposedly too sick to come into the office to do your job. There's also the overall tone of the book, which I've seen a lot of people mention they found a little douchey. I don't know if I completely agree with that. I think the author is just a really good self-promoter. One of the first anecdotes the author shares is a retelling of how he won some salsa dancing tournament in Brazil. I think it was Brazil. Might have been Argentina, and it might have been the tango. I can see how this tone is meant to be motivating. I think it's obvious that the author cares a great deal about the subject matter at hand here and isn't afraid to promote himself or his other work. I kind of respect that on one level, but I can see why it puts some people off. I get the same feeling reading this book as I get watching, well, any ad on the internet about earning passive income. You know, the ones with the guy standing on the boat or stepping out of a Lamborghini or something like that. There's a lot of that in this book. Another issue with the book is it's largely out of date, or at least a lot of the advice in it isn't as relevant today as it was when it was published. Now, I know that's not the book's fault necessarily. I mean, they don't update themselves. Being published in 2008, a lot of the information the author shares about setting up an automated drop shipping business is not very relevant. Just to give you an idea how apparent this is, one of the example businesses the author talks about is selling a yoga DVD through the mail. I mean, come on, nobody does yoga anymore. That said, I think it's simultaneously become a lot easier to set up the kind of business described in this book, but also a lot harder. Platforms like Shopify mean you can have a fully functional dropshipping website up and running within a couple of hours. There's sites out there like Udemy if you want to create and sell some kind of course. There's the whole third-party Amazon something or other that can handle the whole fulfillment side of things. All these tools make setting up the kind of business described in this book way easier, which consequently means there's a lot more people trying to do that very thing. That's where it gets harder. You see, at least based on my research, dropshipping and just generally selling junk online has gotten way more competitive in the last few years. There's just way more stores, way more websites, way more sellers selling the same thing that you're trying to sell. Good luck getting your yoga DVD noticed among all the other yoga DVDs on offer. Even the section on negotiating a remote work agreement seems a little outdated. I don't know what year it is where you live, but right here, right now, it's 2020. If you have a job that can be done remotely, I'm willing to bet you are currently doing it remotely. However, even before the world became a total dystopia, I think acceptance of the whole remote working thing has grown remarkably. The company that pays me to do my real job let its employees work from home even before leaving the house became so dangerous. And a lot of other companies do the same thing, which means that this part of the process should be way easier, provided you have a job that can be done remotely, that is. If you have a job that you need to be physically present at to do, like a brain surgeon, a firefighter, a cashier, stripper, then the advice in this book simply won't work. I guess if you're in one of those kinds of jobs and feeling miserable, it's TS for you. Which brings me to my main issue with the book. First off, let me say that I have a tendency to not do a lot of research on a book before I pick it up. I don't read reviews, I don't read summaries, nothing. I like to go in with as clear a head as possible and form my own opinions and come to my own conclusions. The Count of Monte Cristo, as I found out, has nothing to do with enumerating sandwiches, which is why I gave that book only 1 star. If I had known what was actually in this book, what it was actually about, I probably wouldn't have read it. I've always been interested in entrepreneurship for the creative elements. This idea of creating something, a brand, a platform, a product, something that brings value to people. I enjoy seeing the expertise that entrepreneurs develop about their field or their product. How well they know their market, how well they know their customer, how committed they are to what they produce. This passion, this drive that you see in anyone who creates something, that's what I hope this book would be about. That's not what's in here. This book, if you follow its instructions, basically precludes you from being passionate about anything you do. In the world of this book, you're an entrepreneur pursuing entrepreneurial ventures in order to make money. And you're pursuing these things not in the value they create or your interest in them, but because they'll allow you to make as much money as possible, as fast as possible. I think the problem that this book sets out to solve has less to do with a lack of time than a lack of value. The problem that you have, if you're the target reader of this book, is that you don't see any value in what you're doing. You don't enjoy the day-to-day and can't see yourself sitting in that cubicle for another 25 years until retirement. The solution that the book proposes has to do with freeing up an incredible volume of that time. But if you're not filling that time with something that brings value, then I don't think you're going to be any less miserable. The solution here of lying your way out of doing your job and making a quick buck selling random crap online, it just doesn't feel right to me. It's not what I think about when I think about entrepreneurship. The book doesn't really talk about how you can bring more meaning to your life, or how you can bring more value to the world. It only talks about how you can free up more time. I think the solution, if you're miserable and stuck in a cubicle and don't want to spend the next 25 years there, is you need to find something to do with your time that brings more value, that has more meaning. This book, as implied by the title, is all about getting you more time. Speaking of more time, I'm going to end this review before, it takes more time. Final takeaways? Well, this book, like most books, is not something that it isn't. At its core, it's a manual on how to achieve a specific objective. If what it sets out to achieve sounds appealing to you, if what it sets out to achieve is something that you're interested in, then go nuts. If, like me, you didn't find a lot of appeal on what's offered here, then I'm not sure I can recommend it. I think the biggest takeaway from the book is about changing perspectives. The author very strongly refutes a lot of preconceived notions and really questions a lot of the paradigms that surround the modern work world. One statement that I found particularly insightful was how the author questions the very notion of a 40-hour work week. He questions why 40 hours was picked as the number. and how everybody in the world needs exactly 40 hours to accomplish their job. I mean, there's a lot of people who work more than 40 hours, but that's beside the point. If nothing else, I will say I did walk away from this book considering some new possibilities and perspectives that I didn't have before. Now, about the possibility of this video having some kind of meaningful ending. Well,